the entire McClure family, and to Jim's many friends and associates. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield the time to Senator Risch.
Thank you, Senator Crapo. Mr. President,
Senator from Idaho.
fellow senators, we came to the floor today to mourn the loss of a great statesman in Idaho. Jim McClure was loved uniformly across the state of Idaho and had dedicated really his entire life to public service. First as a prosecuting attorney in Payette County, Idaho, and then, of course, the State Senate, Congress, the House of Representatives, and then the United States Senate. From a little historical background, Jim McClure, when he was elected to this body in the United States Senate, he was elected to what's called the Shoup seat. The Shoup seat was first held by Senator Shoup, who was the last territorial governor of Idaho, the first state governor of Idaho, and the first United States senator to hold that seat. Jim McClure was the 9th person to hold that seat. In the interim, it was held by William Borah. Both Shoup and Borah have statues down in Statuary Hall here in this building. Prior to my election as the 11th person to hold this seat, the seat was held by our distinguished colleague, Senator Craig, who is here with Senator Crapo and I and has joined us on the floor, and I'm sure joins in our remarks and our expression of condolences to the McClure family. Jim McClure was a family man, and he was truly dedicated to his wife, Louise, and his children. Back when Jim served here, many of the members actually moved here as opposed to going home on the weekends as most of us do today. And the McClure family spent a lot of time here, but they did spend their summers, and that was when the United States Senate was out most of the summer. They did spend their summers in Idaho and other times also in Idaho. Jim McClure was very dedicated to a couple of important issues, the first one being fiscal issues. And Jim McClure would come back to Idaho and warn about the spending habits that this United States Congress had. In fact, I think I'd known Jim McClure since I was a young prosecutor back in the 1960s. And I think Jim McClure was the first one I ever heard speak of directly about the danger that this Congress was leading this country into with its spending habits. Had his advice been followed back then, we would not be, as a country, in the difficulties we are today. Secondly, Jim's issue was energy. Jim spent time as a chairman of the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. Indeed, I sit on that committee today. Senator Craig sat on it before me, Senator McClure before him, and Senator Jordan before Jim McClure. And indeed, we can't recall that anyone serving from Idaho, that we didn't have a person on that committee. Indeed, it was the Shoup seat, really, that has sat on that committee for as long as any of us can remember. As a testament to the larger-than-life persona that Jim McClure had, the following are named after Jim McClure in Idaho. In 1995, the College of Mines and Earth Resources at the University of Idaho was dedicated as the James A. McClure Hall. In December of 2001, the federal building and United States Courthouse in Boise, Idaho was renamed for Jim McClure. And in 2007, the University of Idaho renamed their Bureau of Public Affairs Research the James A. and Louise McClure Center for Public Policy and Research. Well, all of this recaps certainly an inadequate way the many, many things that Jim McClure did for the people of Idaho, indeed for the people of America and people of the world as he led here in the United States Senate. But I want to close just briefly with what I knew about Jim McClure, and I think what those of us here knew about Jim McClure and what he's remembered for here in the United States Senate. In the media today, we see a lot of rancor, and we see a lot of arguing and a lot of hostility involved in the political process. If I can say one thing about Jim McClure, is what he brought to the entire process was civility. No matter how tough sledding got, no matter how disagreements escalated, Jim McClure always kept it level. He always kept it at a very civil tone, and Jim McClure approached everything with a gentle sense of humor, which many, many times diffused things that could have gotten out of hand. To his family, again, we express our condolences, our deep condolences, and the people of the state of Idaho mourn today. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Idaho.
Mr. President, Senator Risch's comments prompted me to think of a time when I was first elected to the United States House of Representatives. Senator McClure had long been counseling and working with me and helping me to see the kind of civility that Senator Risch talked about, and also that strong, powerful leadership that he brought to issues. And when I was first elected to the House of Representatives, I just began thinking, as Senator Risch was talking, about how Jim McClure and Louise invited me to go to dinner. And Jim and Louise sat with me for an evening right here in Washington, D.C. at a local restaurant. And we just talked about politics, about Idaho, about America, about the world, and about how one should lead on issues as they dealt with them in Congress. And I have to tell you, it would take too long to repeat all the lessons that I learned that night that were taught to me by Senator McClure as he made that extra step to reach out. I said in my initial remarks that he was a mentor and a role model for me, and I truly mean that. And I just had to add those comments as I thought about that while Senator Risch was talking. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate now proceed to the consideration of Senate Resolution number 78 relative to the death of Senator James A. McClure.
Clerk will report.
S.Res. 78, relative to the death of James Albertus McClure, former United States Senator for the state of Idaho.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would note that this resolution was submitted earlier today by Senator Risch and myself, and in fact, our leadership helped in preparing it and bringing it forward, and all 100 senators are co-sponsors of this resolution. I think a fitting tribute to the respect and honor in which Senator James A. McClure is held by this United States Senate. And before I ask unanimous consent to take action on the resolution, I would ask if Senator Risch had anything further that he would like to add.
Well, thank you, Senator Crapo. I think we have gone through the various things that Jim McClure was known for, and it is a true loss to Idaho and a true loss to the nation. He was held in such high regard by all Idahoans, and I'm proud to be a person holding his seat. He was a co-founder and a charter member of the steering committee here on the Republican side. And the steering committee was a group that was brought together to talk about and develop policies from a conservative standpoint for the nation. And it certainly was something that has been very helpful to the Republican conference over the many years. So Senator McClure will be remembered for that, and we certainly thank him for that. And thank you. With that, I'll yield the floor to Senator Crapo.
Thank you very much, Senator Risch. And before I ask unanimous consent, Mr. President, I know that Louise and a number of Senator McClure's family and friends are watching, and this is a short but meaningful resolution. I believe I should read it in its entirety. Relative to the death of James Albertus McClure, former United States Senator for the state of Idaho. Whereas James A. McClure served in the United States Navy during World War II. And whereas James A. McClure served the state of Idaho as a prosecuting attorney, a city attorney, a member of the Idaho State Senate, and as a member of the United States House of Representatives. Whereas James A. McClure served the people of the state of Idaho with distinction for 18 years in the United States Senate. And whereas James A. McClure served the Senate as chairman of the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources in the 97th through the 99th Congresses, and chairman of the Senate Republican Conference in the 97th and 98th Congresses. Whereas James A. McClure served his caucus as a founding member and chairman of the Senate Steering Committee in the 94th through the 96th and the 99th through the 100th Congresses, now therefore be it resolved that the United States has heard with profound sorrow, that the Senate has heard with profound sorrow and deep regret the announcement of the death of the Honorable James Albertus McClure, former member of the United States Senate. Resolved that the Secretary of the Senate communicate these resolutions to the House of Representatives and transmit an enrolled copy thereof to the family of the deceased. And resolved that when the Senate adjourns today, it shall stand adjourned as a further mark of respect to the memory of the Honorable James Albertus McClure. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, that the preamble be agreed to, and that the motion to reconsider be laid upon the table.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, may I now ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
I note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
You're watching live coverage from the floor of the U.S. Senate. And before leaving tonight, members approved 2 nominees to become U.S. District Court judges in northern Georgia. They're also working on a bill to change procedures for issuing federal patents. And later this week, they'll work on temporary 2011 federal spending. Some type of compromise has to be reached with the House by Friday in order to keep the government from closing. And as always, you can follow the Senate live here on C-SPAN 2. Earlier, we talked to a Capitol Hill reporter about what to expect with that federal spending, and we'll show you as much of this as we can during the quorum call. We're having some problems with that interview, but now we'll bring you the Capitol Hill reporter. He'll talk about what to expect with federal spending, and we will show you as much of this interview as we can during the quorum call.
Patricia Murphy of Politics Daily. House lawmakers are working on another temporary funding measure to keep the government running past Friday. Why do they need another one?
Well, they need another one because they have not come to an agreement with the Senate about how to fund the government for the rest of the year. So rather than coming to a standoff with the Senate that could easily result in a government shutdown, the House is trying now to do just a smaller stopgap resolution that would get the government funded at least for another 2 weeks to give them enough time to debate this with the Senate and to get a longer-term agreement. So they had enough worries about the fact that they may not be able to agree with the Senate on a long-term piece, that they knew they needed to just buy some time. This short-term 2-week CR is what that would do for them.
So what do you think, 2 weeks, will that give the House and Senate leaders enough time to work out an agreement?
You know, it's a little unclear. It looks like the House and Senate can at least agree on how to fund the government for the next 2 weeks. I mean, they're taking baby steps here. They're agreeing on possibly $4 billion in cuts. It looks like the House and Senate leadership are in agreement over what those cuts could be, but those cuts are really the lowest hanging fruit. I mean, it's the few areas of agreement where they might be able to say, yes, we'll cut that, yes, we'll cut that. And every week that it goes on, as the cuts get deeper, the harder it is. It's going to be for them to come to an agreement about just where they should start cutting the size and scope of the government.
How important is the newly elected class of Republican freshmen in the vote on spending for fiscal 2011?
They are crucial. I mean, I've never seen freshmen really play such a huge role in the leadership of the House or Senate. And this is a new class that is coming on, the House Republicans in particular, on a mandate, they believe, of cutting government spending. And so the House leadership, the House Republican leadership, has gone in to make some cuts to the federal government. And the freshmen told them, no, we want you to cut it more. So we're looking at the unusual situation where the House Republican leadership is taking a lot of its cues on this from the freshmen, the people who've been in office for less than 2 months. But these are the people who have kind of the most recent endorsement of the voters. They are the people who came in because they tossed out a lot of the Democrats who were engaging in a lot of very high levels of government spending. And so the GOP leadership is listening to these freshmen very, very carefully, and the freshmen are not really telling them what they want to hear, to be honest with you. So there's a dynamic of tension between the Republican leaders in the House and the freshmen who are pushing the leaders to do more and cut more.
You were there when House Majority Leader Eric Cantor talked with reporters. What did he say about the possibility of a government shutdown?
Well, I asked him, and he wouldn't say what he thought the possibility was. He and Speaker Boehner are in a situation where they don't want to completely take a shutdown off the table, otherwise that gives away all of their leverage, but they also are trying to make it clear that from their point of view, they don't want a government shutdown. They know that in terms of polling, the American people don't particularly want a government shutdown. They certainly saw the lessons in 1995 when the Republicans were blamed for the government shutdown. It really seemed to hurt the Republicans at the time and give President Clinton a lot more momentum for his efforts. So they certainly are trying to walk this line very, very carefully. They know that the politics are very dangerous for them here. But they haven't taken it completely off the table because they want to make sure that they can go into the negotiations with the president and with Senate Democrats, at least still holding some cards in their hands. So they won't take it off the table, but they are saying that that's not what they want to happen.
Patricia Murphy of Politics Daily. Appreciate your time.
I thank you.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent to call the quorum be initiated.
Without objection.
I now move to proceed to count number 11, H.R. 359.
Clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 11, H.R. 359, an act to reduce federal spending and the deficit by terminating taxpayer financing of presidential election campaigns and party conventions.
I have a cloture motion to desk, Mr. President.
Clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the motion to proceed to calendar number 11, H.R. 359, an act to reduce federal spending and the deficit by terminating taxpayer financing of presidential election campaigns and party conventions, signed by 17 senators as follows.
Mr. President, I ask consent that the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I also ask unanimous consent that the mandatory quorum under Rule 22 be waived.
Without objection.
I now withdraw my motion to proceed.
Motion is withdrawn.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to S. Conres 8.
Clerk will report.
S. Conres 8, concurrent resolution recognizing women serving in the United States Armed Forces.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the concurrent resolution be agreed to, the motion be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be laid on the table, there be no intervening action or debate, and any statements relating to this matter be placed in the record as if read. Mr. President, before you rule on this, they had last week a very, very good series on National Public Radio about women in the military. It was really wonderful. It was so full of information. Talked about a woman that had served in the military in World War II, had her daughter who had served in World War II, had a general, woman who was the first four-star general to be a woman. It had a woman who had been in the military in the 80s, and her daughter, who was a graduate at West Point now, who's going to go to medical school as a result of her military service. It was really terrific. And, of course, the issue that the Pentagon's working through, and it's quite difficult, is combat for women. They had one woman there who was awarded, on this program, who was awarded the Silver Star for her gallant action, her heroic actions. She was part of a caravan. It was attacked, and she was the hero of the battle. The shooting went on for 45 minutes. So anyway, I'm very happy to be reading this into the record. I would ask the chair to rule that this is without objection, because it certainly is the right thing to do to recognize women serving in the United States Armed Services.
Without objection, so ordered.
There's a bill to desk, and I ask for its first reading.
Clerk will read the title of the bill for the first time.
H.R. Agencies of the government for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2011, and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I now ask for second reading in order to place the bill on the calendar under the provisions of Rule 14. I object to my own request.
Objection having been heard. The bill will receive a second reading on the next legislative day.
I now ask the unanimous consent to Rules Committee be discharged in further consideration of S.Res. 70.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I ask that this resolution be placed on the calendar.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business day, it adjourn until tomorrow morning, March 1st at 10 a.m. Following the prayer and the pledge, adjourned proceedings be approved to date. Morning hour be deemed expired. Time for the two leaders be reserved for use later in the day. Following any leader remarks, there will be a period of morning business for up to 1 hour. Senators be permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each during that time, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or the designees, with the majority controlling the first half and the Republicans controlling the second half. Further, Senate recess from 12:30 until 2:15 p.m. to allow for weekly party caucuses. Finally, following morning business, the Senate will resume consideration of the Patent Reform Act of 2011.
Without objection.
Mr. President, senators should expect roll call votes to occur throughout the day in relation to the amendments to the Patent Reform Bill. It's a very important piece of legislation. We've been waiting for years to get this on the floor. And if senators have amendments, they should move them quickly, because we hope to finish this bill very quickly. If there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it adjourn under the previous order and under the provision of S.Res. 78 as a further mark of respect for the late former Senator James McClure.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow, and pursuant to Senate Resolution 78, does so as a mark of further respect to the late James A. McClure.
So the Senate's gavelled out for the day, members having approved 2 nominees to become U.S. District Court judges in northern Georgia.